My wife forgot our anniversary, so I forgot to pick her up from the airport. A 23-year-old man, married to Sarah, 25. We've been together for 5 years now. And honestly, I'm at my breaking point. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's been through something like this, but I need to vent. Let me set the stage. It's our 5th wedding anniversary. You'd think that after 5 years of marriage, a little acknowledgement of the milestone would be a given. Right? I mean, I had subtly mentioned it for weeks, casually dropping hints like, "I can't believe we've been married for 5 years, time flies," or "Do you think we'll do something special for our anniversary this year?" She nodded and gave her usual distracted responses. No big deal. Right? I figured she was just busy. But then the day comes, and it's like any other day. She didn't say a word. Didn't even ask about what I had planned. No flowers. No dinner. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I mean, I had gone all out for our anniversary every year before. I planned surprise dinners, wrote her heartfelt letters, organized thoughtful little gifts. I tried to make it special, but for the past couple of years, it felt like I was the only one making an effort. So I bring it up. I said something along the lines of, "Hey, I guess we're not celebrating today," and she just laughed it off like it was no big deal. She said, "Oh, we'll do something later. Don't worry." But later never came. It's like the day just passed without her even remembering. I was hurt. I don't know how else to put it, but I was frustrated. I put so much into this marriage, and yet here I am, alone on our anniversary, just forgotten. That's when things started to spiral. The thing is, she had a business trip that same week. She was supposed to fly out on the 14th for work and return the next evening. As usual, she asked me to pick her up from the airport. At first, I hesitated. I've been giving her little passive-aggressive hints, but she just didn't seem to care. She kept making jokes about how tired she was from the trip, how she couldn't wait to get home, but didn't acknowledge the anniversary at all. She just kept talking about work like everything was fine. I let the frustration build. Honestly, I was done trying to get through to her. I had been the one doing all the work, making every special day memorable, while she was always too distracted or busy. So that night, after laying awake for hours, I decided to do something about it. I wasn't going to pick her up from the airport. I made the decision then and there. I wasn't going to reward her disregard for me. Maybe if I stopped being so accommodating, she'd realize how much she was taking me for granted. I didn't text her, didn't call, didn't do anything. When she sent me the usual message about her flight details, time, gate, etc., I didn't even respond. I didn't even acknowledge it. It felt empowering to just not care for a moment. I spent the day doing my own thing, treating myself like I deserved without thinking about Sarah's flight or her return. Around 8 p.m., I got a text from her. Then another and another. She started calling over and over. I just ignored it. Part of me felt guilty, but most of me felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Sarah was stranded at the airport with no one to pick her up, and I wasn't about to play the dutiful husband anymore. She could figure it out. Finally, about an hour later, after ignoring her calls for what felt like an eternity, I sent her a text. "Oh, sorry. Totally forgot you needed a ride. Happens sometimes. I'll admit, it was a little petty. I'm not proud of that. But after 5 years of constantly putting her needs first, I finally snapped." The words felt almost too sweet, dripping with irony. I knew it would make her furious, and that's exactly what happened. The next text I got was a series of angry rants, calling me petty and irresponsible. She went off about how I was overreacting, how I was being childish. I didn't care. The next few hours were a blur. She finally made her way home somehow. And when she walked through the door, there was a coldness in the air. She barely acknowledged me. She was still angry, sulking, and I just didn't care anymore. I went to bed early that night, leaving her to her thoughts. The next day was no better. Sarah didn't even apologize. She gave the same old excuse about work being stressful, that she just lost track of things, but I wasn't having it. I wasn't going to let her sweep everything under the rug anymore. I wanted to hear her admit that she messed up. I wanted her to realize what she had done, but as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing was going to change. So I let her stew in her anger. And me? Well, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and satisfaction. I'm not sure where this will lead, but I can't go back to how things were. Something's got to give. Update 1. So after I sent Sarah that message about forgetting to pick her up, I didn't hear from her for a while. But oh, boy. When I did, it wasn't pretty. She started texting, then calling over and over. I ignored every single one. Part of me wanted to just let her stew, but I kept my phone on silent, and hours went by. I wasn't going to rush to pick up the pieces when she was the one who'd ignored me for so long. It wasn't until about 10 p.m. that I finally caved and checked my phone. I had missed around 15 calls and at least 20 texts. Most of them were a mix of her calling me petty, irresponsible, and childish. She was furious. The text that stood out the most was one that said, "You really had to leave me stranded? This is how you treat me after everything I've done for you." I wasn't going to get sucked into that guilt trip. Instead, I responded calmly. Maybe now you know what it feels like to be forgotten. I didn't add anything more. I knew any further explanation would just be lost on her. Sarah tried to defend herself the best she could. Her response was classic. I'm sorry. Okay? But I've been busy with work. I didn't mean to forget the anniversary. You know how stressful things have been lately. It was the same excuse she always used, work stress. But this time, it wasn't going to fly. I didn't reply right away. I just let the silence hang between us. After a while, she finally got the hint. But it wasn't until the next morning that I learned just how badly she had been affected by the whole situation. Sarah waited at the airport for over 3 hours. Apparently, she tried calling me every half hour during that time. She wasn't able to get a cab right away because she didn't want to waste money on one. Eventually, she broke down and called one. But by the time she got home, it was well after midnight. When she walked through the door, I didn't greet her or try to make small talk. She didn't even look at me. She just walked past me and dropped her suitcase on the floor. It was clear that she was still angry. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She tried to talk, of course, but it wasn't a conversation, more like a monologue about how unfair I was being. I've been working hard, and this is how you treat me? She asked. Her words were full of frustration, but the excuses just didn't do it for me anymore. I wasn't interested in hearing about how her job was hard when I felt like I had been carrying this relationship on my own for months. The first night back was miserable. We didn't speak much. The only time she really looked at me was when I was getting ready for bed. I could feel her eyes on me, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I wasn't going to make the first move. The next day, Sarah tried to smooth things over by texting me, saying, I've been working so much lately. It just slipped my mind. You know how it is. Same old story. Same tired excuse. At this point, it was so obvious that she just wasn't getting it. We barely spoke over the next few days. Every time we did, it felt like she was walking on eggshells. She was passive-aggressive, and I wasn't going to back down either. I had made my point, and I wasn't going to let her convince me that everything was fine just because she threw around a few empty apologies. It didn't help that her dad got involved. He called asking why Sarah had to take a cab home. He was concerned, of course, but it felt more like he was trying to guilt-trip me. I can't believe you left her there, he said. She's been working so hard, and you just let her figure it out on her own. I didn't even know how to respond to that, so I didn't. I let the call end and just walked away. Later that evening, Sarah tried her best to apologize, but it wasn't genuine. It was forced. Almost like she was saying sorry just to end the tension. I guess I could have done better, but you didn't have to leave me stranded, she said. There was no real accountability. No understanding of why I was upset in the first place. Just another deflection. I wasn't going to settle for a half-hearted apology. I told her, I'll move past this if you can actually acknowledge what I'm feeling and start being more considerate. It's not just about the anniversary. It's about how you treat me in general. Her response? She accused me of overreacting. She said I was making a bigger deal out of this than it was, but I wasn't backing down. After a few more days of silence and tension, I decided to set some boundaries. I needed space to focus on myself, so I started engaging in my own hobbies again. It was a relief to not feel obligated to constantly cater to her moods. Sarah wasn't exactly thrilled with this, but she made one last effort to smooth things over. She booked a dinner reservation for the two of us. She said it was to make up for things. I don't know if she genuinely thought it would fix everything or if it was just a last-ditch attempt to avoid real accountability. But either way, I wasn't sure if it was enough. I was still waiting to see if she was really going to change. Would this be a genuine effort or just another temporary fix that would fall apart in a few weeks? Update 2. So after the whole airport incident, Sarah finally decided to try and make things right. She booked a dinner reservation at a restaurant claiming it was to make up for everything that had happened. I won't lie. Part of me was cautiously optimistic. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment she'd finally realized how much she'd hurt me and actually put in some effort. But as usual, that wasn't the case. The day of the dinner, Sarah texted me around noon to let me know the reservation was set for 7 p.m. I didn't really feel any excitement. I was just going through the motions. Maybe it was the fact that this wasn't our first attempt at fixing things, or maybe it was the nagging feeling in my gut that this dinner wouldn't change anything. But I got dressed and decided to give it a chance anyway. At least for one night, maybe things could be different. We arrived at the restaurant, and to my surprise, it wasn't some nice intimate place like I had hoped. Instead, it was a generic chain restaurant. The kind you go to for casual dinners when you don't feel like trying too hard. It wasn't even a place I liked. I had made it clear before that I wasn't a fan of those types of restaurants, but Sarah had picked it anyway. I tried not to let it bother me, but it was hard not to notice the lack of effort. It felt like she had gone for the easiest option. Like, she couldn't even be bothered to consider what I might enjoy. The conversation started awkwardly. Sarah immediately began talking about how stressful her work had been. going on and on about deadlines and meetings and how much pressure she was under. She didn't even try to acknowledge the fact that she had forgotten our anniversary or left me stranded at the airport. Instead, she just kept talking about work. She mentioned something about how she was doing her best and stressed out, but I couldn't help but feel that she was completely missing the point. She hadn't apologized for the anniversary. She hadn't apologized for making me feel completely invisible. The more she talked about work, the more frustrated I became. It wasn't just that she was ignoring the bigger issue. It was the fact that she didn't seem to realize how much her behavior had affected me, and it hit me harder than ever. I realized in that moment that this wasn't a one-off mistake. This was a pattern. We were sitting there trying to have a nice dinner, but all I could think about was how out of touch she was with what really mattered. She didn't even seem to understand why I was hurt. It wasn't just about the anniversary. It wasn't just about the airport. It was about all the little things she had neglected over the years. The birthday surprises I planned alone. The holidays we spent apart because she was too busy. Our small talk didn't last long before things started to unravel. We had a small disagreement about the food, but as usual, it turned into something bigger. She got defensive, insisting that I was being too picky and ungrateful. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the food. It wasn't about the restaurant. It was about everything else. That's when it all started to spill out. I told her how I felt ignored. How she never seemed to put any real effort into our relationship. I brought up the anniversaries, the birthdays, the quiet nights where I felt like a background character in her life. But instead of owning up to anything, Sarah just deflected. She started talking about how nobody's perfect and how I should just appreciate what I get. And there it was. The excuse I was so tired of hearing. Nobody's perfect. That was the line she always pulled out when things got tough, and this time was no different. When the waiter came by to ask if we needed anything else, I just looked at Sarah. Her expression was blank. It was clear she wasn't even listening anymore. She gave a token gesture, handing me a small box of chocolates with a half-hearted smile. "Here," she said. "For you. Sorry about everything." It was a nice gesture, I guess. But it felt insincere. A last-minute attempt to make things right without actually doing anything to change the bigger issues between us. I didn't even want the chocolates. I was past the point of small gestures. I needed something real. The rest of the dinner was silent, awkward, and full of empty words. We barely spoke on the drive home. I could feel the tension in the car. Sarah was still annoyed, but I wasn't sure if she was more upset with me for calling her out or with herself for not understanding why I was upset in the first place. It didn't matter either way. The silence was deafening. When we got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing had changed. I'd hoped that maybe this time, she'd actually get it. Maybe she'd realize that it wasn't about the little things. It was about the bigger picture. But that hope quickly faded when I looked at her and realized she still didn't see it. Over the next few days, Sarah started doing small things around the house. She washed the dishes, helped with the laundry, and did some cleaning. At first, I thought maybe this was a sign that she was trying to change. But it felt more like damage control than anything else. She wasn't doing these things because she genuinely wanted to. She was doing them because she knew I was upset. And she wanted to avoid another confrontation. I found myself emotionally withdrawing more and more. I couldn't help it. I didn't want to keep getting disappointed. I didn't want to keep waiting for her to change when it felt like she wasn't even trying. I didn't want to fix someone who wasn't willing to meet me halfway. A friend of mine suggested that I give Sarah an ultimatum. "Either she changes or you walk away," he said. It seemed harsh, but maybe it was the wake-up call she needed. I couldn't keep going on like this. Constantly wondering if she was going to make a real effort. As the days passed, Sarah's excuses kept piling up. Work, stress, deadlines, those were always her reasons for everything. And I was starting to see a bigger problem. Sarah didn't seem to understand the emotional disconnect that had been growing between us. She thought that by doing the bare minimum, everything would be fine. But I knew that wasn't enough anymore. I started to think about our future together. Was this relationship even salvageable? I didn't know anymore. Update 3. After weeks of dealing with the same cycle, empty apologies, half-hearted attempts at change, and more excuses, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't go on like this anymore. I had tried being patient, tried giving her chances to step up, but it was clear that Sarah just didn't get it. So I decided to sit her down and have the conversation I should have had months ago. It wasn't easy. I had been putting it off, hoping she'd come to the realization on her own, but that wasn't happening. So one evening when she got home from work, I told her we needed to talk. There was no getting around this one. We sat down in the living room, and I could feel the tension already building. I didn't want to yell, but I couldn't sugarcoat things anymore. I started by saying, "Sarah, I can't do this anymore. This relationship has been one-sided for too long. You've ignored me, forgotten important moments, and you never take accountability for any of it." At first, she just stared at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "I've been working so hard, and you're acting like I'm doing nothing." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. It's not about your work, Sarah. It's about how you've treated me. The anniversary? The airport incident? I've tried to make this relationship work for both of us, but you haven't even tried to meet me halfway. Sarah immediately went on the defensive like she always does. You're blowing things out of proportion, she said, her voice rising. You're acting like I forgot your anniversary on purpose. I didn't mean to forget. Okay? I've been stressed out with work. I wasn't buying it. It's not just the anniversary, Sarah. It's everything. It's every time you make me feel like I'm not important. It's every birthday, every holiday that goes by, and I'm the only one putting in any effort. Sarah's face hardened. I'm not perfect. Okay? Nobody's perfect. I do what I can. She shifted the blame back on me. Maybe you're just too demanding. Maybe you expect too much from me. Her response made me even angrier. I'm not asking for perfection, Sarah. I'm asking for basic consideration. I'm asking for respect. I'm asking for you to care about our relationship the way I do, but you don't. And that's what hurts the most. The room was silent for a moment. I could tell that Sarah wasn't expecting this kind of conversation. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly not knowing how to respond. I guess I could have done better, she muttered. But it was obvious that she didn't really believe it. She wasn't fully taking responsibility for anything. She wasn't even sorry. She was just saying the words because she knew she had to. I'm not interested in hearing you say you could have done better, I said, keeping my voice steady. I need more than that. I need to know you get it. I need to know you understand how much your neglect has hurt me. And I need you to show me that you're willing to make an effort. Sarah avoided looking at me. She was uncomfortable. I could see it. But I wasn't done. I had one last point to make. If the roles were reversed, Sarah, what would you feel? How would you feel if I forgot our anniversary and left you stranded at the airport? For the first time in this whole conversation, she was silent. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I could see the wheels turning in her head. And for a moment, it looked like the truth was finally sinking in. She didn't say anything for a long time, and I let the silence hang in the air. Finally, Sarah broke the silence with a quiet, I don't know. I guess I'd be pissed. I nodded, exactly. That's how I feel. That's how I felt for a long time. I suggested something simple, couples activities like regular date nights or just spending time together to rebuild the connection we used to have. I wanted to see if she was really willing to put in the effort to change things. We can try this, but it's going to take work from both of us. I can't keep carrying this relationship by myself, I said. Sarah looked at me, and there was a moment of hesitation. Okay. I'll try, she said. But her tone was flat, like she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. I don't know if date nights are going to fix everything, but I'll try. That was it. The lukewarm response I expected. It didn't feel like a commitment. It felt like an obligation. I knew I had to give it a few weeks to see if anything would actually change. I couldn't just take her word for it. The conversation ended on a tense note. Sarah didn't seem convinced, and neither was I. We went to bed without much more said, both of us stewing in our own thoughts. I kept wondering if Sarah's words were genuine or if she was just saying whatever she thought would get me off her back. I decided to give it time, but in the back of my mind, I knew I couldn't keep waiting forever. I had already put so much into this relationship, and I wasn't sure how much more I could give if things didn't change. I couldn't let myself be stuck in a cycle of disappointment and broken promises. So now I'm just waiting. Waiting to see if Sarah will actually make an effort or if she'll slip back into her old ways. I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know one thing, I won't stick around for another empty promise. Update 4. So after that serious conversation, things seemed to take a turn for a little while. Sarah tried harder. She actually planned a small date night, a dinner at a local restaurant we both liked. Nothing fancy, but at least it felt like an effort. She also started helping around the house more, doing the dishes without being asked, taking out the trash, and picking up groceries. For a week, things seemed a little better. I even began to think that maybe she was finally starting to get it. Maybe I had been wrong about her. But by the second week, things started to slide back to normal. Sarah canceled a planned outing, saying that work had piled up and she just couldn't get away. Again, her work stress was always her go-to excuse. I tried to be understanding, but it was hard not to see it as just another empty excuse. I was frustrated. I had hoped that her efforts in the first week meant something, but now it felt like a temporary fix. Something she did just to keep me quiet. The worst part came when Sarah forgot another milestone. She didn't remember the day we first met. It wasn't anything huge, just a small thing that mattered to me. I brought it up casually, but she just shrugged it off like it was no big deal. And in that moment, I realized that she wasn't even trying to keep track of these things anymore. She didn't care about the little moments that used to mean something to both of us. It was just me trying to hold on to whatever spark we had left while she seemed to be losing interest. I started questioning everything. Did Sarah really care about our marriage, or was she just assuming that I would always be there? It seemed like she didn't even notice how much I was putting into this. And that thought stung more than I'd like to admit. I wasn't sure anymore if she actually valued me or if she just took me for granted. One day while I was tidying up the living room, I found something that made my blood run cold. I came across Sarah's calendar tucked behind some papers on her desk. I don't usually go through her stuff, but something told me to take a look. I saw the date of our anniversary marked on the calendar. But here's the thing. She still forgot it. It was like she had planned for it, made a note of it, but just didn't bother to remember when it actually came around. I was beyond frustrated. I confronted her later that night, asking why she'd marked our anniversary but still managed to forget it. She came up with some weak excuse about forgetting to check her calendar that week. That's what she said. Like, it was just some innocent mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was blatant neglect. When I looked at the calendar more closely, I saw what had really been prioritized. There were work deadlines marked, sports events, weekend getaways with friends, but there was hardly anything about us. It was like our relationship didn't even make it onto her radar. I had known that work was always her main focus, but seeing it laid out like that hit harder than I expected. I had been trying so hard to keep things going between us, but it felt like she couldn't be bothered to even try. The final straw came a few days later. I overheard Sarah on the phone with a friend talking about a weekend getaway they were planning for a sports event. She was excited about it, talking about the details of the trip like it was the best thing ever. I felt sick to my stomach. This is something she hadn't even mentioned to me. She had time for a weekend getaway with her friends, but she couldn't even remember the little things with me. I tried to push it aside at first. But the more I thought about it, the more betrayed I felt. It wasn't just the fact that she was prioritizing her hobbies. It was that she never even considered how I would feel. She had time and energy for everything else, but when it came to us, it was like I was an afterthought. So I stopped engaging. I stopped making the effort. I stopped texting her throughout the day, stopped trying to make small talk when she got home. I figured if she didn't notice the distance between us, then maybe she never would. I needed her to see what was happening. I needed her to feel what I was feeling. Eventually, our friends started to notice. At first, they were all on Sarah's side, saying I was overreacting. But now, they were starting to see it too. A few friends reached out to me, saying they understood my frustration, and even admitted that Sarah had been selfish. They told me I deserved better, and that's when I realized I wasn't the only one who saw the truth. But things didn't change. The final blow came when Sarah canceled our pre-planned dinner date to go to a last-minute event with her friends. She didn't even tell me in person. She texted me an apology saying she just couldn't say no to the invitation. That was it. That was the moment I realized that I had to make a decision. This wasn't something I could keep putting off. Sarah wasn't going to change. Not unless I forced her to. I could keep waiting for her to figure it out. But at what cost? The longer I stayed, the more I felt like I was losing myself. I needed to stop waiting around for a relationship that wasn't fulfilling. So now I'm at a crossroads. I don't know if I'm strong enough to walk away, but I can't keep going like this. The emotional distance has grown so much that I'm not even sure how to fix it anymore. Something has to give. It's time for me to make a drastic decision about my marriage. One that will either force her to wake up or give me the space I need to move on. Update 5. After everything that had happened, I knew it was time to step back and really think about what I wanted. I needed to figure out if I was willing to keep trying in this relationship or if it was time to walk away for good. So I decided to spend the entire weekend alone. I didn't answer Sarah's texts or calls. I didn't even leave the house much. I needed space to think. And this time, I wasn't going to let my emotions drive the decision. It was during that weekend that the truth really hit me. I had been settling for less than I deserved for a long time. I realized how emotionally drained I had become, trying to hold on to something that wasn't even there anymore. The little things I did for Sarah, the gestures, the effort, it felt like it was all just going unnoticed. She wasn't putting in any effort to make me feel valued. She wasn't even trying. And the worst part, she didn't even seem to notice that anything was wrong. Sarah just went about her usual routine, assuming everything was fine. That realization stung. I spent the whole weekend thinking about how much I had given to this relationship and how little I had gotten in return. I wasn't just upset about the anniversary or the airport incident anymore. I was upset about the bigger picture. Sarah had never really cared to put me first. She had never seen me as her priority. When I came out of my weekend of reflection, I knew I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I was emotionally exhausted. And if I stayed in this relationship, I would only keep getting hurt. So I planned one final conversation with Sarah. This was it. I was going to lay everything out once and for all and set clear boundaries for what I needed if this relationship had any chance of survival. I decided to wait until the following weekend to have the conversation. Sarah was going to be home, and I knew this would be the last chance for us to really talk. I was prepared to be direct to tell her everything I had been holding in for so long. When the time came, I sat down with Sarah in the living room. She could tell something was off, but I don't think she expected what was coming. I started by telling her that I couldn't keep going on in a relationship where I felt unappreciated. I've tried to communicate with you, I said, but nothing ever changes. You're always too busy, and I'm always the one making excuses for you. I can't do it anymore. Sarah looked shocked. She couldn't believe I was saying all of this. She kept asking, why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't realize things were this bad. It was like she was blindsided by everything I was saying. But at the same time, it was hard for me to feel sorry for her. How could she not realize it? How could she not see the toll her neglect was taking on me? She immediately shifted the blame back to me. You should have told me how you were feeling. I didn't know things were this bad. I thought everything was fine, she said. She made it sound like it was my fault for not being more vocal about how unhappy I was. That was the moment I realized how deeply out of touch she was with the state of our relationship. I've tried, Sarah. Over and over again, I've tried to communicate, but you never listen, I said, trying to stay calm. You don't take my concerns seriously, and I've just been left feeling alone. I can't keep doing this. Sarah didn't take it well. She begged me for another chance. I'll change, I swear. I'll put in more effort. I'll prioritize you. Please don't leave me. Her voice was pleading now, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. For a moment, I almost wavered. But I knew I couldn't just let her keep making empty promises. She had been doing that for years. I'm willing to give it one last try, I said. But this time, things have to be different. I need you to actually show me that you can change. No more excuses. No more empty apologies. Sarah agreed. But I wasn't convinced. Her words were just that, words. Actions spoke louder. And I needed to see if she would follow through with anything she said. We talked about specific things she could do. Making time for us. Planning more thoughtful dates, actually being present when we were together. It was a simple list, but it was a start. The next few days were a mix of small but noticeable changes. Sarah started planning dates again. They weren't huge, but they were thoughtful. And it was clear she was trying. She started being more present at home, taking the time to talk to me instead of retreating into her phone or the TV. It felt like a step in the right direction, but there was still a part of me that didn't fully trust that it would last. A few days later, Sarah surprised me with a handwritten letter. She apologized for everything. Acknowledged how much I had been carrying in the relationship. And said that she was committed to making real changes. I was shocked. This was the first time she had taken real responsibility for her actions. And it meant a lot to me. It was a step forward. But I still wasn't sure if it would be enough. I started feeling a glimmer of hope, but I stayed firm in my boundaries. I wasn't going to let myself fall into the same patterns. I had to see real, lasting change. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things could get better. But I wasn't going to let my happiness depend solely on Sarah. I had learned that much. So for now, I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I'm in control of my own happiness no matter what happens with her. If things improve, that's great. But if they don't, I'll be ready to walk away. The decision is in my hands now.